All right, today I want to talk about biomolecules, and it's not going to be pretty. I'm not used to talking to a screen. I'm used to all of you sitting here with me in my classroom and us laughing together and talking about the football game last night or what you played on Fortnite or Destiny or COD or the girls and the Revelio dance stuff. So I'm not quite used to talking on a screen. So I appreciate your grace and I appreciate you being patient with me. We are talking about biomolecules, and biomolecules are important to biology because they're the very smallest unit of biological things. Okay, they're basically carbon-based molecules because bio itself means life. So bio means life, and that's going to be important. And then molecules are the smallest things of life, the smallest fundamental unit of like a chemical compound. Okay, so we're going to talk about a little bit about that. But before we talk about biomolecules, it's really important that you understand, and this is going to be part of biomolecules later. Let me move my screen. The importance of water. So water is the foundation of life, and all of life has con in it, or CHON, which is carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. Part of that is water. Okay, and we wouldn't have life without water. You've heard that because of the whole, Mars thing and trying to figure out if there's life on Mars and in the frozen poles and things like that. So water is cool and water is weird. I don't know if you remember your chemistry stuff, and I don't really know when you had it last year. You may have had it at the beginning or the end. I'm not really sure. But water is 2 hydrogens, so H2O, and 1 oxygen. And I'm sure you know that, H2O. Everybody says I need some H2O or whatever that is. And it's special because there's 2 nonmetals bonded together. That doesn't usually happen. Okay, usually when you have things that are bonded together, it's a metal and a non-metal on the periodic table. One thing comes from the left side of the periodic table, one thing comes from the right, and they merge together because of the electrons they need. The other thing about water is that it's polar, and polar means that it has a more positive end or a more negative end. So one of the ends is more positive or negative. So what that means is, and this is a little bit of a lot right now, but what that means is that water, the way they're bonded together, it kind of pulls weird, and so water pulls awkwardly or weird at a 45-degree angle, and so it pulls at this 45-degree angle. And it causes a skin on water, which is why you can like hold a drop of water in your hand. There's like this cool skin on water, and it's because of the way the molecules, the way they bond together. Okay, and that's going to be important later. I keep trying to do something on my other computer. That's going to be important later, but I just want you to know that for now as kind of foundational knowledge of biomolecules. So there's that cool picture of what water looks like, and see how it has that skin on it. It's because of the way the bonds are in water. Okay, so biomolecules are the molecules that make up all living things. So we talk about the smallest unit of a lot of different things. You've talked about it in science forever. You've talked about atoms and things like that. Biomolecules are the smallest unit of living things. Atoms are the smallest unit of non-living things, so to speak. So bio means life, and biomolecules are small substances that are made of atoms of elements that bond together. So just kind of like what we heard of earlier, when I said con, that's kind of how I remember it. But another way to remember is chomp, and you'll see this in the Amoeba Sisters video that you'll watch later. But carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus are the main elements that we'll talk about in regards to life. Okay, and so the atoms of elements bond together to form 4 main types of biomolecules. Now you're probably thinking, I thought you said biomolecules are the smallest unit of life. Well, atoms are still in that, so that doesn't disregard the atoms piece, so I apologize for that. But but biomolecules are kind of the smallest unit of what makes up different parts of life. And they have a function, and so that's kind of where it becomes different. So there's carbohydrates, so that's carbs. You've heard of that. Keto diet, don't eat too many carbs. Lipids, which are fat. Proteins, if you're an athlete, you've heard about eating proteins and why proteins are important. And then nucleic acids, which is part of our DNA. So we're going to go through each of the functions of these, because what we're trying to do is compare the functions of different types of biomolecules. That's our TEAC. We want to compare the different functions. And so that's what you need to be able to do. So the student needs to be able to compare the functions of different types of biomolecules, and that includes the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. On your notes for today, on your notes kind of for today that you'll use, I put a graphic organizer. And what that means is just kind of like a more picture version. A lot of you are artists and sketchers, and I put a more picture version of what you'll need to use for an activity later. But it also, if you print it out or if you have access to it, it's a really good tool to use so that you can see all the functions in different ways. So this is a periodic table. You've seen it before. On the left, you have metals. On the right, you have non-metals, and the army green stair stepper are your metalloids, and they have different electrons, and you'll learn a whole lot about this in chemistry next year. But that just kind of gives you an idea if you haven't had a whole lot of experience with a periodic table before. Okay, first thing we're going to talk about, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, you always hear starches, food. You talk about brown, kind of the more brown and tan tone food. So carbohydrates, the elements in carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and they are known as CHO. Okay, and so you're going to, in just a minute or sometime today, you're going to fill out a table with this information. I also gave it to you in a couple of different ways. But CHO, and so that's carbon, what happened to that? That's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. All carbohydrates are made up of, all biomolecules are made up of monomers. And that's the simplest, smallest part of the biomolecule. So if I made a house out of Legos, each little Lego is kind of like a monomer. Okay? So monomer is just one piece. So if I said carbohydrates are made of this monomer, it means it's made out of this one type of Lego, and that's how I built the whole house. So carbohydrates, mono means one. Monomers can bond together to form big biomolecules called macromolecules, also known as polymers. And poly means many. So when you're thinking about your vocabulary and you're thinking about word associations, just know that the prefix mono means one, macro means really large, and then poly means many. Some of you may know that, but I wanted to give you an example. So here's an example of carbohydrate monomer. All the biomolecules are made out of these tiny little pieces of something. So the monomer for carbohydrates is called a monosaccharide. It's a big word, but it just means sugar, one sugar. So one is mono, and then saccharide is sugar, if you were to break that word down. If you bond several monosaccharides together, they make a polysaccharide, so many sugars. Starch and cellulose in plants are types of polysaccharides. That's going to be important later. Monomers of carbohydrates are monosaccharides. The shaping ratio is 1:2 to 1. So that means there's one carbon, there's two hydrogen, and one oxygen for each monomer. And I'm going to show you a picture of that in a minute. But carbs can look like a ring or a line. Okay, so every time you have one carb or one molecule, you have one carbon, two hydrogen, and one oxygen. Okay? So here's what it would look like. This is the carbohydrate acetyl. This is what it would look like. You have lots of different things together, and you don't have to know all this. This is just kind of so you have an idea of what it looks like. All you have to do is know the function of each one. Okay. I know you're going to put this in your chart, but you don't have to memorize all of this. I know it might be a lot of little details. So functions of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are quick energy. Before I go run a triathlon, which I used to run triathlons a couple years ago, but before I would go run a big triathlon, you've heard of carb loading, or I'm going to eat a whole bunch of pasta. I used to have a friend that would do miles and miles on his bike, and before he did, he would take a huge loaf of bread. His mom would bring him, and he would eat the loaf of bread while he was riding his bike all over Houston. So that is one of the functions of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates also are used for storage. So plants, their storage is in cellulose, and animals is in glycogen. Okay, so where are they found in the cell? In plants, they're found in the cell wall, chloroplast, mitochondria, cell membrane, DNA, and RNA. And then in animals, they're found in the cell membrane, the mitochondria, DNA, and RNA. And we're going to learn all of this stuff in the next unit, kind of. So if you'll just write this down, if some of these sound like it's a foreign language, that's okay. We're going to learn it in the next unit, and it'll probably make a little bit more sense because we'll do cell structures next. But because these are building blocks, these biomolecules, I wanted to do this first. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about are lipids. Lipids are your fats. There are healthy fats and there are non-healthy fats, and we're about to talk about that. All of these are found in your foods, so hopefully some of this sounds familiar. Elements in lipids are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So the monomer, or the Lego pieces that make up fats, it's called 1 glycerol and 3 fatty acids. We're just going to write this down. I know it seems like a lot, and we're going to go through it a little bit later, but just kind of start there. So write down 1 glycerol and 3 fatty acids on your chart. Fats can either be saturated or unsaturated. So, you've heard of McDonald's and saturated fat and how you can eat healthy and eat the unsaturated fat. Okay, and so they're going to talk a little bit more about that, what that looks like. You can see this on some food labels. The difference between the two types of fats is, the only difference is a double bond. And I'm going to show you that in the structure. Fats have more energy per gram than carbs do. Excuse me. So fats have more energy per gram than carbs. That's important. Usually you don't hear that. Usually you hear that proteins have a whole bunch of energy. Not true. It's actually fats and then your carbs. So that's mind-blowing, right? So the difference between saturated and unsaturated, butter, meat, fat, so that white you see around red meat, that white, I don't know, it's gross to me, but cheese, they're all saturated fat because they're solid at room temperature. So that kind of helps you know that that's a saturated fat. Oils are unsaturated fat. They're liquid at room temperature. So when I say the only difference is the double bond, a bond is how many atoms of elements are joined together. Some bonds are really strong and some aren't as strong. And we'll talk about that kind of as we go along. It all depends on the number of electrons needed to make the atom stable and how much they share electrons. So the bonds are stronger. It's all about the arrangement in that electron shell in the outside of an element. So anyways, we'll talk about that later. Okay, next. So this is what they look like. So this is the glycerol and then the 3 fatty acids. Okay, and then here's a double bond off of this fatty acid. And this is just hydrogen in a straight line, carbon in a straight line, and oxygen. Again, you don't have to know the structure. You just need to know, you don't have to recreate the structure. You may have to know that it's glycerol and 3 fatty acids, like if you saw it, but you don't have to memorize these structures or things like that. For the carbohydrates, you need to know it's in a ring or a line, but you don't have to know all the elements that go in the ring of the line or how they go and things like that. All right, shape and ratio of fats, which is what we're in. There's no predictable ratio like the 1-2-1 with the carbohydrates. Fats don't have that. And then they look a lot like parking lots, lipids do. We're going to talk about lipids when we talk about cell membranes. So saturated fatty acid looks like the top one, and unsaturated, you see that double bond on the screen? Sorry, that means it's going to be liquid at room temperature. And then the top one is going to be more like a butter or something like that. It looks more structured, so it's going to be a solid at room temperature. That doesn't always happen, but that just kind of gives you a way to remember that. The function of fats, or the function of lipids, or what we're talking about, are energy storage, insulation, and hormones. They are found in the cell membrane and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, which, again, big words, and you may not know these words, and that's okay. We're going to learn them when we go to cell structure. Right now, hopefully you have the table out, or you're looking at the notes and you're filling in the table with the information, because you'll need it for the activity at the end. Okay. Proteins. We all hear about proteins, especially with keto diets and how to eat proteins, and the importance of proteins. But I'm actually going to kind of tell you a myth about proteins, and as we go along, and something that might blow your mind a little bit. But here's examples of protein: chicken, eggs, beans, nuts, some legumes, things like that. Elements in proteins are CHON, and you'll see this in the Amoeba Sisters. They kind of do it a funny way at the end. But carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So the new one on this one is the nitrogen when you're talking about proteins. The smallest unit, the Lego piece of what we're talking about, which is proteins, are amino acids. And that's important to know. You want to know what's the smallest unit of that biomolecule. So for carbs, it is the monosaccharides. For lipids, it is that the glycerol fatty acid unit, and then for proteins, it's amino acids. Okay, so here's an example of what it might look like. The primary protein structure is the chain of the amino acids, so it's just a long chain that makes up the protein. And then they usually have terminal ends that it's actually a code for something later, but it'll tell you that it's ending. That's what terminus means. Okay, structure and ratio. So amino acids bond together to form proteins. It is the order and number of amino acids that makes each protein different. There's like a code. It's like a secret code, and we'll put that later in our units. But there's a secret code for proteins that comes from it comes from something else, but it's really interesting. The code for the proteins comes from another biomolecule, DNA, which is next. But amino acids are going to be really important when we start talking about DNA transcription and kind of how cells talk and how they reproduce and stuff like that. So the function of proteins are for structure, they're for support, hormones, antibodies to fight disease. The big one for proteins is that they help with enzymes. They make up enzymes that help speed up reactions using less energy. And we're going to talk about enzymes later in the week, but enzymes are going to be really important. And I know that we have this myth that proteins give you this long-lasting energy. That's why you need to drink a protein shake right after you work out, because then you'll have long-lasting energy. That's not quite true. I know that's kind of mind-blowing. Proteins are good. I totally agree with them. I work out every day. So proteins, and I played sports and stuff like that. Proteins are good, but not necessarily for long-lasting energy. They have a lot of other really important things that they do. Enzymes would be a really important one. Where are they found in the cell? Cell membranes and ribosomes. Again, if some of those words are something you've never heard before, we're going to go through it later. And then here's some examples. the amino acid chain for primary protein structure, and it gets a little more difficult, which you don't have to know. Remember, going back to the teaks, what do you have to do? You have to be able to compare the functions of different biomolecules. So that's why the graphic organizer is so important. You really just have to know the different functions of the different biomolecules. So the next thing we're going to talk about, nucleic acid. This is the last one. So the other three you can find in foods. So proteins and carbs and fats are all in foods. You get all that stuff and put it in your body by eating. That's how we get energy. That's how all life gets energy, from eating. Different ways, but that's how. Nucleic acids are the only biomolecule that's already within. It's already it's in your DNA. Okay. So nucleic acids, they are made up of CHOMP. That's what you'll hear in the Amoeba Sisters. So carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Okay, that's the added one. The new one for this is phosphorus. Remember, carbohydrates and lipids only had CHO, and then proteins had CHON, and nucleic acids have CHOMP. All right, and here's what it would look like. So you have a base. The bases are different. You don't have to know this right now. You'll have to know it later. But this is kind of the structure of it. The monomer, the Lego piece for this, the very smallest unit of this, is called a nucleotide. And a nucleotide actually has 3 parts. It has a sugar or a deoxyribose or a ribose. It has a phosphate group. And it has a nitrogen base. And so there's 5 different nitrogen bases: adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, and uracil, which is only an RNA. But really what I want you just to kind of take away today, if this is a lot, is just that the monomer for nucleic acid, the monomer for nucleic acids are nucleotides. Okay, and so here's more examples. This is all your nitrogen bases and your phosphates and stuff like that. This is a DNA structure. Okay, the function of nucleic acids is that they're genetic material. Super important, right? This is where we all get all of our genetic material, the code of life. There's 2 types of nucleic acids. There's DNA and RNA, and we're about to learn, the whole year is about a lot of this. So it's found, the DNA is found in the nucleus. Hopefully some of you all knew that, in eukaryotic cells. The RNA is found in the cytoplasm and in ribosomes. Okay, from here we'll look at where these molecules are in the cell and how they are made in the cell. Living things are amazing. They all have the 4 molecules of life in some way, and yet everything is special and unique in its environment. So let the biology begin, so to speak. Hopefully that helps some, and it will help you with the unit that we have and with the activities today. Please email me if we have questions, or you can use my Google Voice number if you have questions. I can always set up a Zoom with you. Right now I'm kind of available at different times depending on my meetings, but I'm always here to answer questions via email or that Google Voice number I put on my Canvas page. And that should be it for this unit. I hope you're having a great day. I miss you. I can't wait till you actually come to class, because it's kind of boring to be here by myself. So hopefully that will be soon. And again, if you need anything, just let me know. Bye.